Berurah class. In today's class, we are going to continue in the laws of Tefillah, and we will be discussing not passing before the person engaged in Shemona Esrei. We had previously talked about how to focus on Shemona Esrei, what you need to do to focus on the words, understanding what things mean, and now we're going to talk about some appropriate conduct in which one should engage when it comes to being in the same space as someone who's praying. So we knew basically to stay away from like gross things, disgusting things, things that are nasty, people being obnoxious around you, to focus yourself, more things about this over here. Okay, so don't walk in front of them. So the first halacha is not to in the section entitled to not interrupt in front of the prayer. In front of the person saying the tefillah. The first halacha aleph, it is prohibited to sit within the arba amos, within an arm's reach, okay, or within about 5 to 6 feet of the person engaged in prayer. That is whether you are behind them or whether you are before them, and whether you are to the side of them. And this also means to the Ramah adds to behind them as well, and you must be outside of those arba amos, okay? And if you are engaged in other parts of the prayer service, even if you are reciting prayers from the very beginning of the prayer service, like Ezehu Makomam Shel Zavachim, where do we bring the sacrificial offerings in the morning? The Mishnah that's recited at the beginning of the prayer service, you do not need to move away from them. And some people even permit for someone to sit and learn Torah next to them, even though it's not part of prayer. Furthermore, there are those who even say that the permission to be there is only at the side of them. However, in front of them, as long as they can see you, you need to be out of their way. You can't be there. And that's even if you're reciting the Shema. So it's an interesting dispute on all different sides of this matter. So the Mishnah explains, you can't sit, and you also can't lean. However, some people who say that you're leaning slightly, which is like you lean up against the wall, but if I took the thing holding you up away, you can continue to stand, that's not considered so bad. So if you're just standing there and you're kind of leaning to one side a little bit against the wall, that's okay. But if you're leaning your full weight into the wall, that would fall down if I took it away, you can't do that. Okay, and within his arba amos, the Mishnah explains that even if you are it's a full circle and not a square, so that if you are sitting at an angle, that's also arba amos. You don't have to be further. You don't have to make a square around them. You can make a circumference around them outside of their arba amos circle, and you don't need to add on the additional 20% for the diagonal. He quotes the Chayyim that if the person who is praying stands on one side, and that thing is 10 tefachim high, so 35 to 40 inches off the ground, and it's about 4 tefachim, or about 12 inches square, then you can sit next to that platform, okay? Because it's considered another place. So he's davening in another room. However, you can't pass next to it, and assuming it's not so high, you can't see to the other side. Okay, then you can't pass it. Okay, but therefore you can't pass in front of the platforms, or if it's at an angle, you shouldn't be passing in front of them, even at a slightly lower level. If they're like stadium seats. Okay, if you had stadium seats in shul, and you should find somewhere else to sit. Okay, if you're just going to be there. Okay, the person praying, and we say even if the prayer is the end of the prayer service, at the very end of it, as long as he hasn't taken his steps back to remove himself from the prayer. And so too if he's actually still in the middle of the prayer itself. The Ramah adds that you shouldn't also be behind him, and people tend to agree with that, even though the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it. And anything that we say that has to do with the prayer service, even those chapters we say on the afternoon of Shabbos Mincha, you could go ahead and sit next to the person and pray because you're engaged in prayer yourself. Now, what about if you're learning? So we say that there are those who permit that. Why? Because, the Mishnah Berurah explains, the rabbis didn't prohibit sitting next to a person davening unless you are being just sitting there and useless, like just being quiet right there. Because then it's like, I don't want to be involved in this whole prayer service and accepting the yoke of having to upon myself. But when you're engaged in Torah learning, at the very least, well, people wouldn't say that about you. So it's about perceptions. Okay, and a lot of these later opinions hold that you should be strict about it to stand like that. So stand and learn on a stender. Okay, if it's not difficult for you to stand. However, you could be lenient on behind this person because that there's more leniency for it. There's more to be lenient for that. Okay. Another thing is that when you're learning Torah, it means you have to actually recite them from your lips, but not just stare at the words and think about what's being said. Okay, and if you're saying prayers as well, you have to say those things as well. With your lips, so that people wouldn't think that you're just sitting there and being annoying in prayer and not trying to be part of the prayer service. Okay, and the most strict opinion is to get out of the way. Why is that? Because it looks like you're being bowed to by that guy. And therefore, it's only when you're sitting that it's prohibited. But if you're standing in front of them, that's okay. And that's even within Zavar Amos. And it appears that even when standing, that walking in front of him, you shouldn't do that because you might ruin his focus on prayer. I had a guy annoy me with this one time. He didn't want to. I was sitting in the front and he was saying I needed to move, and I said I looked at him and I go, why are you bothering me? He says, well, and he's sitting behind me. Like I was in the very front next to the wall. He has the row behind me, and he says, I don't want to make it look like I'm bowing to you. I said, we're all here davening. That's not what that law means. He's like, well, I said, I don't want to hear it. I said, I don't care what you want. Follow the rules of the prayer, and if you don't want to make it look like that, then you move over. Because we say that if everybody's here praying, that's not what it looks like. So here it's only when you're sitting and quietly doing it. That's what we're talking about. Okay. And that's what we say. So about this case. So the Mishnah Berurah brings a Pri Chadash that says that you don't have to be strict for this. Okay. Whether you're from in front of him or the side and everybody else, that you don't have to be strict about it. However, other posts can disagree with that you should be strict on this prayer. So the Mishnah Berurah adds, however, that when you're reciting the Amidah, when you're reciting the Shemona Esrei, and you're outside of the guy's Arba Amos, there's no reason to be strict. Okay, even if you're standing in front of him. And as we basically said, this the same thing. It's only when you're sitting down. Okay, so when you're standing, it's not a problem, even within Arba Amos. Even though there's the whole look like you're bowing to somebody. It's only when you're sitting. Okay. Halacha Beis. There are those who say that if you are sitting next to someone praying and you're not feeling well, it's okay to continue sitting. So Mishnah Berurah explains that everyone knows that you have a difficulty standing. And therefore, it's permitted because we know you're sitting because you're not feeling well, right? Or you're in a wheelchair. And it's only sitting on the side of him. However, in front of him, you should still be strict, like we said at the end of the last halakha. Okay? So if you can't move out of those Arba Amos, that's okay. So if you're sitting next to somebody who's in a wheelchair, you don't need to move away. That's their problem. And they don't need to be worried about it. The third halakha here, if you are sitting, okay? Or if the person sitting had been sitting before they started praying, and this guy then gets up to daven, you don't have to move because this guy came into your place, right? So the idea is that it's first come, first serve for this seat in shul. Nonetheless, it's polite. The Ramah adds to stand while they are saying the Shemona Esrei. Okay, so then these rules are basically, like we said earlier, are only when you are going to his place. But when he's in your space, right? You don't have to move. Okay. And so therefore, the appropriate thing is that the Mishnah Berurah explains is that for the person davening should get out of your arba amos, so as not to disturb you. And that's when we're talking about in someone's house. However, if you're in shul and it's a regular prayer service, okay, then you would have to move because everyone is here to pray, okay? And it's even if the places that you're sitting are assigned places and people bought them, you should also be strict. However, if you're learning Torah, there was no such stringency for this, and you can stay where you are, and this rule applies. And so too, the head of the shul or the rav of the town, if he's sitting there and teaching students, and they're sitting and learning, and then people want to come and daven there, one does not need to be mevatel the learning going on for the minyan. Okay, I actually remember this one time. Some people came in one time. They wanted to have a minyan in the shul, and someone said, "I don't want to be disturbed by them having a whole minyan here where we're all sitting and learning." But the truth is that they've got to have the minyan just quietly off to the side, and they have like 7 people in the car. They just need a few more, and they could have said Kaddish, 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 Baruch Shema Esrei with Kedusha. There's no reason not to be able to do that, you know. But you don't have to stop what you're doing while they do that. They can count you as part of the minyan. Okay, so we say it's nice to move anyway. So that way a person shouldn't be considered, you know, tripping up another person, that they want to do the right thing. Okay, and so therefore you should always know it's appropriate to stand up within the arba amos of the other person who's praying. Okay, so it would be inappropriate to sit there and make it look like, oh, this guy is here, he's bothering with all his prayers. Okay. Halacha Daled, the 4th one over here. One cannot walk in front of the person praying within their arba amos, and that's when you're walking in front of them. But to the side is okay. Okay, and even to stand there. So what does it mean to pass in front? Because you ruin their concentration. And therefore, it's also prohibited even if one is reciting Shema as well. And the Chayyim adds that the person is actually walking in between their presence with the Shekhinah, right? So it's like they're having their private personal audience with God's presence, and there you are walking in front of it, blocking the Shekhinah projector, right? They can't see the Shekhinah properly because you are in the way. Okay. And so peripherally, standing in front of them means to stand anywhere in the periphery, but to the side is okay. Okay. However, the Zohar, the Mishnah Berurah brings down, says not even to stand there, and instead one. So we said now the permission of the Shulchan Aruch is to go ahead and to pass along the sides of them, and that's to come to next to them and to wait there while standing. That you should not try to pass somewhere in their vision, because anytime someone can see you, even if it's peripheral, that it's like walking in front of him, and therefore you're distracting them. So based on this, you shouldn't walk and pause in front of people within their arba amos. How closely can you pass behind one who is praying? Oh, good question. So we're going to get to that here in just a second. Okay, so the Aliyah Rabbah over here, he holds that the prohibition is only to pass within the 4 amos somewhere in front of them. However, to go within their arba amos and to stand is okay, even if it's in front of them, and especially when it's really tight in there. Okay, so as long as you're not walking. So behind them would also be permitted as well. If one finishes their prayer, so halacha 5 now, halacha hey. If one finishes their Shemona Esrei, and there's somebody standing behind them who's still praying, you may not take your 3 steps back until that person behind you has finished. Okay? Because if you take those 3 steps back, behold, you are like one who walks in front of them and distracts them. And that's even if the person behind you started after you, and you had already started. Okay? So the Mishnah Berurah explains, but if he's not directly behind you, you know, but he's kind of off to the sides, that would be fine. That's the Aliyah Rabbah we just mentioned. And the 3 steps are when you're taking back the 3 steps within his arba amos. Okay? Or when you take 3 steps back, you move into his arba amos. But if you're going to be outside of those arba amos, that's okay. So if he's like a row behind you, that's a problem. If he's 2 rows back, not a problem. And that's even if you had already started before him, and you're not considered as someone who has been disturbed by another person davening. And that's even if the other person is davening for an extremely lengthy period of time, because the person who's taking the steps is the one who's interrupting his space. So when we're talking about, property rights in shul, you have a right to. This reminds me of moving your airline seat back. Yes, that's a good way to describe it. How far back can you move your airline seat? What is considered interrupting and aggravating somebody with your actions? How much are you allowed to and not allowed to do? Okay. We're now going to move on to 103. It's very short. There's 3 sifim in here. Now, this is a case of where someone has some gas to pass, okay? And so we're talking about someone might actually, that someone might actually be you will be interrupting somebody by passing gas during prayer. This is 103. Okay? So now we're going to talk about 2 different types of gases. All right, one is where you are the up gas and the low gas. All right, so we're going to talk about those different things again. Okay. So one who is in the middle of prayer, and there is a gas that comes from below. One should wait until that smell dissipates and then go back to praying. Okay. So where'd the gas from below come from? So we learned back in Siman 79, halacha number 9, that flatulence are prohibited when you're trying to engage in the Shema or saying brachos, learning Torah. Those things are all prohibited. Okay, so you wait for that to pass. So if someone passes gas, you wait for that to pass. So where do you go back to? The Mishnah explains to where you paused. And that's even if you waited for a long time for it to pass, and with that amount of time, you could have finished the whole entire prayer service. Okay? Because if you wanted to, you could have gone ahead and said it, but you're waiting for this thing to pass. So it's not because of any type of thing that you're doing. It's something that's been forced upon you. And we therefore don't have to go back to the beginning. And we learned about that in the laws of brachos of Kriya Shema from the Ramah back in Siman Samachay in 65. Okay? And so therefore, you don't have to also add any other prayers inside of it. Okay? Because as long as you're not moving away from this person, they're not going to be embarrassed by it. Okay? So we will see in a second over here about what that means about embarrassing somebody who does that. Okay, so now, halacha beis over here. All right, someone needs to release gas. They have it. It's bad. Like it's hurting them. So they need to do that. Okay, and the problem over here is you're stuck because you're in the middle of Shemona Esrei, right? So that's what we're talking about. So he needs to pass gas, and it's really bothering him, and he doesn't think he can keep it in anymore. So then he should move away from other people and let it rip, and then he should wait until the smell dissipates, and then he should say the following prayer. The following prayer starts with the words Ribon HaOlamim, right? It's basically like saying a form of Ashiyatzar. It says, "Behold, you have created within me all types of holes and all types of sealed off places. Is revealed before and known before you our shame and our disgust that we have and our embarrassment in our livelihoods, in our lives, that we have to do this thing. Okay, I have never heard of this post gas prayer. Yes, I know most people don't say it, because we're gonna say you don't have to do this. Okay, so the Ramah brings down. He says, previously in Siman Pei Hey. That some people say that this is only when you're at home, but when you're at shul and in a community, you don't have to move around, you don't have to move away because that's super embarrassing. Okay, and you don't say this prayer at all. Rather, we should wait until the smell dissipates, and that is our custom. Okay. So that's the case. All right. So what does it mean to you can't hold it anymore? Because you're not allowed to go ahead and just pass gas. One does not. What was the line that somebody says? One may not cut the cheese wherever they please. Is the halacha over here? All right. And again, it's kind of funny to see this stuff because we see these like manners and things that are being brought up here. Don't pass gas in shul, at all. And the issue that we spoke about earlier, that there's an issue, which we talked about it in the ayins before, is holding on to. Oh, actually, this is more like in Siman Yigimel, but Siman Vav in Zion, was to say that holding in your need to go is a violation of Bal Tashaksu. That is, you're making yourself disgusting. That doesn't apply to passing gas. Okay, and the Mishnah explains that nonetheless one should remove their tefillin if they're going to do this. Okay, does the talit gadol need to be removed like when going into the restroom? No, it does not. He's saying to remove the tefillin. Okay. So we say he moves to behind him because you need to have your face facing the place that you were praying. So you just go straight back. And then you go back to where you're praying, okay? And you could also move to the side, go over there, take care of your flatulence, and go back, okay? And you should say this in the middle of your prayer. And you should say it in the middle of something else because you've already taken a break, okay? And then go back. Okay, and so we also see over here, we're talking about, again, walking in the middle of the prayer service. Okay, so anyway, what you should do is go back to the place where you were at the beginning of the blessing. Okay, and this is something we will learn later on, that when you have to move out of your place, we'll learn in 104, number 5, that you go back to that place. Okay. However, we learned earlier in Siman Pei Hey, right, 85, which is that the Mishnah explains it there. We explained that if you need to use the bathroom and you pause to complete the whole Shema, you have to repeat the whole thing. So the Bach holds, however, this is different because you just have to pass gas and you have to sneeze a lot. Okay, and there's also, when you're doing these things, maybe sometimes when you belch, you are leaving behind a nasty smell that disrupts people, and that doesn't count. Okay, so therefore. And really, the Mishnah says that really not only should not say it, just think about it. Okay, halacha beis over here. Someone who sneezes or belches in the middle of their prayer, itush is what they say over here. This is sometimes to be translated as sneeze. Okay. Some people say it has to have a sound. Some people maybe it doesn't have a sound, but nonetheless, because right. So if you pass gas. Okay, is one. So some people say that if you pass gas during prayer from below, that's bad, but from above, it's not. It's a good thing. So sneezing is a good thing during prayer. Okay. One more halacha over here. Like I'm gonna have to sneeze. Was that Gimel? I thought there was 3 in here. Is it only 2? Is that number 3? That was the 3rd one. All right, that was Aleph, Beis, and this was Gimel. Okay, all right, so that's it. That was Gimel. Sorry about that. I thought there was one more. All right, those are the halachas. So that's the halacha, and I'm sticking to it. So next time we'll start to we'll now go back to some real hardcore stuff about prayer. We'll learn more about the institution of it. So we'll have 104. Is pretty serious. We'll have 105 also. 104 is talking about making a break in the middle of it. In 105 is going to talk about adding another Shemona Esrei, and then in 106 we're going to talk about who's exempt from tefillah. So we're getting into the nuts and bolts again here of the prayer itself, and not just the conduct in and around it. Thank you everyone for joining today. Hope everyone has a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.